Bueno, muy buenas noches para todos. Es una alegría poder celebrar hoy el nacimiento, los 110 años del doctor Ponseti y recordar su legado y su importancia en beneficio de muchas vidas, incluyendo las nuestras, porque estoy seguro que para todos nosotros la vida ha sido diferente después de conocer el método Ponseti, tanto personal como profesionalmente. Hoy tenemos dos panelistas con las mayores cualidades humanas y científicas. Ambos conocieron de primera mano al doctor Ignacio Ponseti y han sido difusores del método, cada uno de una manera diferente. La doctora Talia Sepúlveda, quien ha sido la primera presidente de PIA Latinoamérica y profesora de muchos de nosotros, y el doctor Thomas Cook, quien desde la universidad se ha encargado de difundir la historia del doctor Ponseti, acompañar las estrategias de salud pública para impactar a muchos en diferentes partes del mundo con el método. La doctora Dalia, conocemos todos sus credenciales, fue la primera presidente de PIA Latinoamérica, ha sido presidente de SCCOT, de la Sociedad Chilena de Ortopedia y Traumatología, es instructora y experta AO. Bueno, doctora Dalia, creo que nos demoraríamos muchos minutos más reconociendo todas sus virtudes y todos eh, sus grandes reconocimientos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos y el auditorio es todo suyo.
Muchas gracias, Sonia, y muchas gracias a Socoin, también a Iowa University y por supuesto también a PIA, que es nuestro refugio, en nuestra casa y nos da abrigo para hablar de Ponseti en este día tan especial. This is a very happy day, Tom. Not only because we are celebrating and commemorating Dr. Ponseti's birthday, 110, as Sonia said, but also because I had the opportunity to see you again. It's been a long time since we haven't seen each other, and we know each other probably, I will not say how many years. Yeah. I may be wrong. We all know that it's very good. Let me just put this to keep talking. It's a very long way since we get to nowadays with the Ponseti. The World Clubfoot Day was introduced in 2013 by the Ponseti International Association, PIA, and is commemorated each year on June 3rd, so it's today. Was established after the signing of the Iowa Board Declaration during the Second International Clubfoot Symposium in October 2012. Tom was already in the board of the PIA by the time that this happened, so he will let us know a lot of good memories and history of Ignacio Ponseti. But October 2012 in Iowa was very special for us in Latin America because it's the same year and the same day that we organized with the help of Jose Morcuende this unique vision and mission of us that the Ponseti method will become the gold standard treatment for the children born with clubfoot in our continent. And one of the main things that this professor has done for the Ponseti method, the life of Dr. Ponseti, is to write a book. He has been with Jose in many places around. They have done and they have built a net, a global net, with the Ponseti method as the pillar of the treatment for the kids that are born with the clubfoot. They have done education, training, they have done net with the practitioners, with us, and with the families, and with some other foundations and some other institution or scientific societies around the world. Here is a picture of Jose and Tom in Peru, where we have such a good memories, in many other places as well. They say that this Ponseti method that changed the life of the kids is Iowa's gift to the world. It's a real pleasure and an honor to present you Professor Emeritus Tom Cook from the University of Iowa. As if it is not enough with this already said about him, he is a senior advisor for the Ponseti International Association since 2006. He is a physical therapist, a biomechanical engineer, and global health specialist. It's like he has got all the requirements to make this a huge, big movement through Ponseti for the kids of the world. So here, Tom, I would like you to present all the audience that is waiting for your talk on the quest for a better life for millions of children in your book, Clubfoot. Please go ahead with your talk. And for all the attendants, please make your comments, make your questions through the WhatsApp or through the Zoom, or the other YouTube channel. Please, Tom, go ahead.
Well, let's see, can you see my title slide?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dahlia, for that very kind introduction. And thanks for the opportunity to talk to this group of dedicated Ponseti providers across Latin America. The last 15 or more years has been it's been inspiring to work with so many really dedicated and talented people like you all are. So it's been a privilege, and I'm very happy to be able to contribute a little bit to that. Let's see. Most of us know Dr. Ponseti from his later years. We know when he was in his 80s and 90s was when he was really finally recognized globally as the leader of this technique that he developed. But along the way, as I got to work with him over the years, we heard many stories about his life, about how he got to Iowa. People always ask, how did he get interested in clubfoot? And I got curious about that myself and started digging into his life story, and it's fascinating story. Well, starts out by where was he born 110 years ago today, and he was born on this little island of Minorca, one of the 3 Balearic Islands in the Eastern Mediterranean. A lot of people think he was from Italy because it sounds like Ponseti is an Italian name, but it's not, or at least it wasn't part of his immediate heritage. Minorca is not a very big place. It's a small island, 9 miles wide and about 32 miles long. I should have put that in kilometers, I guess, but pretty small place. A rocky little island in the Eastern Mediterranean. It's been historically very important over the centuries. It's been controlled by the Turks and the Phoenicians and the Greeks and the Romans and the British and the French, and in the last 100 or more years by the Spanish. So it's actually part of Spain. These are some pictures of what it looks like. Again, sort of a rocky island in the Mediterranean, not very big. Well, I'll point out, see if I can get this to go back again here. You see on the western corner of the island, or edge of the island, is the city here, which is Cittadella, or a citadel. And this is the city where Dr. Ponseti was born. This is the harbor at that end of the island, and you can understand why over the centuries it was a very strategic place to control the Eastern Mediterranean, a very safe place to keep your ships and other armaments. This is what the city looks like, the downtown. Up on the right here, you see the main square of the city, and this is the main street going south, and this is the main street going north. And the size of the street is a real giveaway as to how old this city is, as these were the main streets. On the north side of the town square, you see the street here with this tourist person who happens to be my wife, looking at this building with the red awning. And this is the building where Dr. Ponseti was born. She's looking at this plaque on the wall, which recognizes the fact that Dr. Ponseti, a surgeon from the University of Iowa, was born here and is the father or the founder of the Ponseti method for correcting clubfoot. This is in Catalan, the local language. So this is now it's a tobacco shop, unfortunately, but at the time this was Dr. Ponseti's father's watch shop. His father was a watchmaker, and Dr. Ponseti and the family lived upstairs. He was probably born in one of these two rooms just above the shop. So very, very small town, and again, born exactly 110 years ago today. This was the family, as it turned out. This was his father, his mother, his little brother, Miguel. This is Ignacio, and then his older sister, Catalina. His father didn't have much luck making a living as a watchmaker in Cittadella. There were two other competitive watchmakers, and a small town, small island, there just wasn't enough business for him to get around. So when Dr. Ponseti was 3 years old, he moved to the neighboring island, Mallorca, which is the next little bigger island, and moved to a town there, Phalanx, when he was 3 years old. And this was the time of the Spanish flu epidemic of 2018. And Dr. Ponseti had some vivid memories of the people building streets and fires in the street to purify the air. And as a young boy, he and his colleagues had a lot of fun jumping over the fires, and of course doing what young 6-year-old kids do at that stage, or 4-year-olds. He also remembers the horse carts coming through the city to pick up the bodies of those who had died because of the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918 and 1919. If I get talking too fast, just slow me down.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Okay. So his father couldn't make much of a living there either. So shortly thereafter, they picked up a couple years later and moved to the capital city of the island, Palma. And when he was 6 years old, so he spent a couple years, 2 or 3 years living there. Again, his father trying to make a living as a watchmaker. Dr. Ponseti's family was wealthier, but they had to sell off their furniture and their jewels and many of their personal possessions to continue to survive because of his father's business that just never really caught on. The nice thing about Palma that Dr. Ponseti remembered is it was surrounded by hills and forest, and by the time he was 6 and 7 and 8 years old, he was free to roam the countryside and developed his interest in biology and outdoors and hiking, which was certainly a lifelong passion of his. And finally, in the early 1920s, the family moved to Barcelona, and his father actually got a good job there as a watchmaker. Not only a watchmaker, but he was responsible for maintaining some of the larger clocks in the churches in Barcelona. That became his specialty, and he could make a living doing that. And Barcelona in the 1920s and 30s was a very, very exciting place. Lots of art, culture, opera. He, although his family was not terribly interested in the arts, he had a number of school companions whose parents were, and they would take him along to many of the cultural events in the city at that time. And he, again, developed lifelong interest in particularly art, Spanish art, but also opera and theater and music. So he got quite a indoctrination in the culture of the time. He mentioned at one time he actually had a brief conversation with Picasso, who had come back in 1929 to visit his mother, who was still living in Barcelona. And he remembers that one time he was down near the waterfront in Barcelona, and there were these group of people painting there, and they stopped to look and talk to them. It turns out one of them was Pablo Picasso giving an instruction to a young artist at the beach down there. So there was that kind of an atmosphere that stimulated his interest in culture and art. This is a picture of him when he was 9 years old, his first communion picture in June of 1923. His quote was, "My mother allowed me more freedom than my father would have liked." So he was a bit of a free spirit, and apparently would go off for hours at a time, unknown to anyone, and explore the surrounding area and hike. And again, was interested in nature and biology from a very early age. He got a good education. He went to the institute you see here, and actually graduated with a degree in biology at age 17. So he was a hardworking young student and had the opportunity, again in Barcelona, for a really well-rounded, intense education. This is a picture of he graduated, his picture when he was going to medical school. And he says a career in biology or even mathematics in Spain was economically very difficult because you needed to join a university or college. In medicine, there were more outlets. And since he was interested in biology, he thought it was a good compromise to go into medicine, to follow his interest in biology. So pretty handsome looking guy here at age 22. Fortunately, at the time, the medical school in Barcelona was really top notch. There's a lot of background politically as to the fact that the government had invested extensively in sending the professors off, the instructors off to Chicago and Boston and London and Vienna, and come back with the latest and greatest. So he really got a very high level medical education at the medical school in Barcelona. However, in the summer of 1936, he said there was a real feeling of foreboding. And that was, and on Friday, July 17th, he said they divided our class into 3 groups. One was fortunate enough to be I was fortunate enough to be in the only group that finished the 2 weeks of exams before the war broke out. So on Friday, he finished his oral exams to graduate from medical school, and Saturday, the Spanish Civil War broke out. And the history there is quite dramatic in terms of the outbreak. And Barcelona was one of the hotbeds of that eruption of the war. And this is sort of the classic picture from one of the squares in Barcelona where the rebellion broke out. So about 3 days after he graduated from medical school, no residency, no additional training, he was volunteered to be in the Republican Army as a medical officer. So he was an Army doctor right out of school, basically. This is the first place that he was assigned, and some of the patients, here he is in the yellow oval, this was the kind of patients that he saw, and he was immediately assigned to the orthopedic department and worked under one of his former professors that he had just finished school with at the University of Barcelona. This is also one of his professors and shows the various activities. He was transferred to a slightly different hospital. This was about 60 miles south of Barcelona, and had some very interesting times. There were a lot of innovations during the Spanish Civil War, a lot of medical innovations. This was one of them, and that was hospital trains. They actually developed a train system to transport the injured soldiers from the front line to the base hospitals in the rear. And you see the patients on the train. And interestingly enough, on these trains, 2 of the cars were surgical cars. So they actually were trying to do surgery on that moving train in the late 1930s. So he had some very interesting experiences as a young surgeon, as a young doctor. And here you see again in the yellow oval, he's waiting at one of the railway stations for the hospital train to arrive at that location. And then again, he moved to another hospital in Tarragona. He's on the left here with a little red X, and saw the kind of patients. So he got involved with plaster cast and setting bones very, very early in his career, basically right out of medical school as an orthopedist. And then his last assignment was back in Barcelona. This is the hospital that was originally built as a school, and he watched this being built as a teenager. But during the war, it was turned into a 300-bed hospital, and this was his last assignment during the war. The yellow circle here shows where his apartment was in Barcelona. He lived with his parents when he was reassigned to Barcelona. And then you see the evidence of the bombing that occurred at the same time in late 1938. So he was very much, even though he was in Barcelona, he was very much exposed to the Spanish Civil War. And then the final thing he did as a soldier in the Spanish Army was to transport injured officers from a hospital just south of the French border over the Pyrenees Mountains into France, because Franco's army was moving north, and they were known to actually execute some of the Spanish officers who were in the hospitals. And his last assignment, was to get 24 of these patients out of the hospital across the border into France ahead of the advancing army. And they did that by convincing a group of smugglers who routinely smuggled illegal items across the border on mules. And you see here, this isn't exactly that picture, but it's the method they used. They put the patients on the mules and trucked them across the mountains, mostly at night, because the aircraft were gunning the people fleeing during the day. So for 3 nights, they transported injured workers back and forth across the Pyrenees Mountains to get to France, to get to some safety. And this is the camp this is one of the 15 refugee camps that were established in southern France. And Dr. Ponseti may well be in this crowd somewhere, but this was the actual camp he was in. And then shortly after that, of course, they recognized his medical skills and put him to work in the military hospital for several months. By July, the president of Mexico had offered unconditional citizenship to any of the refugees from Spain who would come to Mexico. And he actually boarded this ship, as you see, in July of 1939, and with the 2,000 of his fellow refugees, made the trip from France to Mexico. And that's how he got to Latin America. He shopped around. He was transported to Mexico City. He spent several months living in Mexico City with his fellow refugees, trying to find a job as a physician, but didn't have any luck probably because the existing group of physicians didn't necessarily want an influx of competing doctors from Spain. So he made a lot of good friends. He got a lot of promises. He met one very good friend I'll get to in a minute, but he couldn't find a job in Mexico City. So he took up a job as a family physician at this small village south of Mexico City, about 80 or so miles south of Mexico City. You see at the bottom, I have three items to tell you about quickly. One is when he arrived, there was an epidemic of typhoid fever. There were 60 villagers who had typhoid fever, and nobody knew what to do with it. One of those people with and he determined that it was the town fountain that was the source of the disease. And he tried to get the town mayor to shut off the fountain and make people get their water from someplace else. The mayor didn't want to do that until the mayor's daughter got sick. And when the mayor's daughter got sick, he threatened Dr. Ponseti and said if he didn't cure his daughter, that he would shoot him. That was his motivation. So the mayor then went along with the different water source, and the patients all survived, and everybody was happy. And the grateful priest part of it is that he was walking down the street shortly thereafter, and the local priest stopped him on the street and thanked him profusely for curing the typhoid fever because he had so many fewer funerals to conduct because the people weren't dying from typhoid fever. So interesting little side story. While he was in the small village here, he had some really interesting experiences. The first time he actually had seen children, because up until that point, he'd only dealt with adults and mainly wounded army personnel. But when he got to the local village, there were babies to deliver, exorcists to deal with, knifings, gunshot wounds. The village actually gave him a motorcycle to do house calls in the neighboring communities, but the volcanic sand and the wasn't sufficient. He was always falling off his motorcycle, so then they gave him a horse. So he actually made house calls by horseback. Now back to Mexico City. He used to go to Mexico City every month to try to get some supplies for his medical practice. And in the process of shopping for a job and making regular visits, he met Dr. Juan Ferril, the chief of orthopedics. And he hung out there for quite commonly to see what was going on, again, because of his interest in orthopedics. So he got to know Dr. Ferril quite well. Interestingly, Dr. Ferril had bilateral clubfoot and walked with two canes and had surgery on both of his feet. More importantly, in 1928, he had done a fellowship at the University of Iowa with Dr. Steinler, the head of orthopedics. So when Dr. Ponseti said, I'm really interested in learning more about orthopedics, Dr. Ferril said, you need to go to the University of Iowa, and I'll arrange it for you. So he wrote a letter to Dr. Steinler, and Dr. Steinler accepted Dr. Ponseti to come to the University of Iowa for 9 months to study orthopedics. Okay, this was in 1940. So another little interesting story, Dr. Ponseti needed $1,000 to cross the border into the US. And his problem was that he was paid with chickens and rabbits and vegetables and not much in the way of pesos. So it took him a long time to save his $1,000, but he eventually did. He said in order to save his money, he ate beans, and more beans, and that he had eaten his whole life quota of beans by the time he left Mexico, and he would never eat another bean. But of course he did. Yeah. And when he got to the bank to get his money out, there had been a devaluation, and his $1,000 wasn't really $1,000. So he went back to the village, got his horse back, and worked a little longer to raise enough money to get to the U.S. This is his immigration card when he crossed the border from Mexico into Laredo, Texas in May of 1941. And I know you can't read this. It's pretty obscure and it's obviously, quite old, but it says he had the $1,000. He was 5'10". He had brown hair, brown eyes, and that he was going to the University of Iowa to study for 9 months. Okay, and at least that was the plan. Another interesting story, one of the questions the border guard asked him when he crossed into the U.S. was, do you intend to kill the President of the United States? And of course, nobody in their right mind would answer that question yes, but he thought was a funny question that they asked. He also said he knew he was in the U.S. when he saw fat dogs, because all the dogs in Mexico were much skinnier than the dogs he saw in the U.S. So little anecdote, things he remembered that were quite interesting. Also, it took 3 buses and 3 days to get from Laredo, Texas to Iowa, and he remembered vividly the all-you-can-eat buffet in Oklahoma. The first time he'd been to a restaurant where you could eat all there was until you were full, and he thought that was just a great American thing to deal with. As he came across Highway 6 into Iowa City, he said everything was green and lush. He arrived on Sunday, June 1st, 1941, and it was 84 degrees Fahrenheit, clear sunny skies. He said it was magnificent when he stepped off the bus. So he thought he was more than happy to be in Iowa. This was a picture of him about that time. And he said, I made the right decision at the end of the Spanish Civil War. I came to Iowa instead of accepting General Franco's invitation to go to jail in Spain. Certainly, the U.S. and Iowa in particular had much more appeal than a Spanish jail. So he was pretty happy to finally, after his long, circuitous route, arrived in Iowa in the U.S. This was Dr. Steinler's house at the time. And when he arrived and got off the bus, he found Dr. Steinler's house, and Dr. Steinler was sitting on the veranda here, of all things, reading a Spanish play. Dr. Steinler was fluent in 6 languages, and Spanish was one of his favorite ones. So Dr. Ponseti was more than happy to realize that his new mentor in Iowa was fluent in Spanish and interested in Spanish culture. This is the Children's Hospital where he went to work. Actually, I used to have an office in this building. It's since been replaced with another building. But in 1940, this was really state-of-the-art Children's Hospital. It was designed by Dr. Steinler and housed almost 300 children at the time. In fact, it was dedicated in 1919. And interestingly, in this brochure for the dedication, it shows a little cripple on his way to health. And what's wrong with the little cripple? Clubfoot. Okay, so clubfoot was very much a part of Dr. Steinler's medical practice and what he did. Dr. Ponseti worked on a lot more things than clubfoot. I mean, obviously he's famous for clubfoot, but I can tell you, I know a half a dozen patients here in Iowa City who were treated for polio by him. He was big on hip disorders, tuberculosis, and I think his real passion was scoliosis. It puzzled him until the day he died that he couldn't figure out what was going on with scoliosis. He did a lot of really interesting experiments with fish and cows that couldn't hold their heads up, and lots of other, it's a whole nother story, his pursuit of trying to understand scoliosis. But he was very much interested in many orthopedic ailments. These are just some quick pictures of what the hospital looked like where he worked back, what it looked like back in the 40s. Some of you probably pretty familiar with a lot of this. I always like this little guy. He's just real happy to have his picture taken. You can see that. Brace shop. the gymnasium, the different modalities and treatments. This actually was the physical therapy department where I worked for a little while. A lot of therapeutic pool activities for the polio patients. This was actually a hospital school. So because of the distances, children would come to the hospital for extended stays. So they actually had a school inside the hospital to keep them occupied. And this was a basket weaving class where they made baskets as part of their therapy. And also, I find this interesting. My office used to be right in this door right here, but they were big on fresh air and sunshine. And even in the coldest weather with snow on the ground, they would roll the patients outside and have them breathe fresh air and get a lot of sunshine to improve their health. Okay, Dr. Steinler was very famous. He published well over 100 papers. He wrote 9 books on orthopedics. And of course, clubfoot surgery was one of the things he was known around the world for, developing different techniques for surgical correction of clubfoot. And one of the first assignments that Dr. Ponseti got was to do a follow-up study of 24 of Dr. Steinler's patients that he had treated in the 1920s and 1930s. After he brought them back and examined them in the follow-up, he came up with this statement, said by the time they were 20 or 30 years old, these patients had stiff, weak feet. There was nothing you could do. They were not normal and they were not functional. So that's when he decided there must be a better way to treat clubfoot. So he got busy studying the anatomy, the pathology, the biomechanics. He was able to locate a number of fetal specimens, aborted fetuses, stillborn babies, and to really look inside and see what is it that was really going wrong with these kids. Another interesting sidelight is this bottle of whiskey, because every year at Christmas, he gave the director of the morgue at the university a bottle of whiskey so that he would keep his eye out for specimens of clubfoot of the bodies that came through the morgue. So he did whatever he had to do to advance science, let's say. And interestingly, by 1949, 1950, he pretty much had it figured out. This is a patient from 1950, okay? And you can see that what their foot looked like at 2 months and what they looked like at 10 years old. In fact, we interviewed a lady about 2 years ago who he treated in June of 1949. And she just had a normal, active life ever since. She's in her late 70s now. So he actually, got busy with clinical trials, started applying what he had learned from his laboratory studies. And even in the early 1950s, he had this pretty well figured out. The problem was he couldn't convince anybody. He published his first significant study in 1963, and in the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. And he later said this work was not read carefully, the deformity was not understood, and the work was ignored for 30 years. So he had quite a difficult time convincing his colleagues to pay attention. In the 1960s, he demonstrated this technique at New York University, and they called him a crazy old man. He published another study in 74. He published another study in 80, and a couple others in between, and no one would pay any attention. They thought this only worked for farm kids in Iowa who wore big boots and walked in the mud, and that kids in New York City would never respond to this treatment. In 1996, he wrote a book, and some of you have probably seen this, and copies are still available, where he put together all of his research, all of his thinking, all of his case studies, again, to try to convince the medical community that this was a better way to treat clubfoot. The real breakthrough came in the late 1990s when he published on the new website in the hospital website called the Virtual Hospital. He published a statement that parents of infants born with club feet can be reassured that their baby, if otherwise normal, when treated by expert hands, will have a normal-looking feet with normal function. So once the buzz got out on the internet, a few parents came from all over the country. He corrected their feet, and then they went out and told other parents. So it really was, he couldn't convince the medical community for 40 years, but once parents caught on, they started demanding. They went, when they went to the doctors, like, do you do the Ponseti method? So the doctors were forced to pay some attention after the parents spread the word. And here's just a couple examples. This is Karen Moss from South Africa, who's having a big celebration today in South Africa, a big symposium. Another couple from Las Vegas. And you can see the number of messages that were posted on the early internet as word spread that it was that there was a non-surgical way to correct clubfoot. And again, over the next 10 years or so, the number of club feet treated surgically for under 1 year, under patients under 1 year of age declined dramatically as the technique was promoted and caught on. And then in 2006, the Ponseti International Association was formed here at the University of Iowa, and you all are part of that. And the activities of PIA over the years have been very many, just some listed here in terms of practice guidelines, multiple symposiums. Two things I would just, can't go into everything. Here's the picture, Barcelona. I think Dolly is in here somewhere. All right. The symposium that we had in 2014 in Barcelona was the third one, and a number of other activities. And that's a whole nother story. I would say two of the things I'd mentioned out of the many that Ponseti International has sponsored is World Clubfoot Day, which we're celebrating today, and the idea that it's an opportunity to draw attention to the Ponseti method, to draw attention to clubfoot, and to rally support for treating the kids born with this shortcoming. And then, of course, training. And of course, Dr. Mukwende is the penultimate champion with a couple hundred trips around the world in the last 10 years to promote this technique and to train others to train others to train others, so that you can ultimately reach every kid everywhere. And then there's been support from quite a few organizations, and I think in Latin America especially, we've had some really good support from Rotary International and the Rotarian Action Group for Clubfoot. So as Dolly mentioned at the start, we like to use the tagline, Iowa's gift to the children of the world, or the Ponseti method is that, and as the prospect of changing 200,000 lives a year, that's how many kids are born with clubfoot, and really a gift from a young aspiring doctor who had a hard early years in life, who overcame many obstacles, but persisted, even after he developed this technique, persisted for 40 years to promote it and to insist that it was really the best way to treat clubfoot. And this is a little clip just to show you how happy Dr. Ponseti would be today that World Clubfoot Day is being celebrated around the world. This is Dr. Ponseti. In 1943, he's at a camping trip since he liked the outdoors so much. And I think if he were here today and we said World Clubfoot Day is being celebrated in countries around the world and thousands of kids are being treated and corrected, he would do this dance for us. So I think, again, I think you're all to be commended for carrying on his legacy and keep fighting the fight to promote this everywhere that we can possibly promote it, so that there's no kid anywhere in the world that goes through life with untreated clubfoot. It's one of my favorite little pieces of video there. As Dolly mentioned, I wrote a book a couple years ago. It's still available here at icecubepress.com. If you're interested, there's some more little anecdotes and some more of the story about interacting with the medical community and trying to promote this technique against significant resistance. But I'm happy to take questions and any comments. I'm sorry I ran a little overtime, but it's hard to stop once you get going on such an interesting story.
Oh, well, it's worth to hear this history from you, Tom. Thank you so much for let us know some secrets, some parts of the life of our master, Dr. Ponseti. It's I'm not sure, but it's kind of a strange thing. It's for us that he came to Latin America directly. Maybe is that the relationship that he had with us? Because we know that in Latin America, we were convinced a little bit earlier, probably than other parts of the world. And maybe that it's because he was so close to us. He had in his memory, and he had some kind of a...
Yeah, I think his time, his time in Mexico, I think, and was really formative because, again, that's the first time he actually dealt with children and infants, and saw, was able to apply the skills he developed in his military service in terms of casting and manipulation. At the time of the Spanish Civil War, there was a lot of controversy about, do you dump a bunch of sulfur into wounds and bandage them? And the theory that was developed in a couple of the doctors in Vienna at the time said, no, leave it alone, immobilize it, and let nature heal the wounds and the bones, and as opposed to dumping all the sulfur drug, all the powder and whatever. So I think he was able to apply his newfound thinking about how to treat fractures and so on to a problem like clubfoot. So it was very opportune connection to have the skill set that he developed as a military surgeon and then applied to a problem like clubfoot.
Of course. Yeah, through your history as well, we see that the world has not changed that much. It is still very difficult to go from Mexico to USA.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure how much money do they have to pay now, but it's certainly something that is still in our societies. We have a couple of questions, Tom, that do you know why Dr. Ponseti did not stop working after he retired? Is something that you had an opportunity to comment on with him?
Yeah, good question. In 1984, he was forced to retire because at the time the university had 70 years old as a cutoff. So the law at the time said he couldn't work beyond 1984 because he was 70 years old. So for 2 or 2.5 years before they changed that requirement, they rescinded it so he could come back. But for those 2.5 years, he took art lessons, and he was quite an amateur artist. His son sent me 3 or 4 of his sketchbooks, and he was very much into art and actually built a little room on his house as an art studio. But he wasn't satisfied with that at all. And he used to come and visit the clinic, even though he wasn't allowed to treat patients. 2.5 years later, they changed the regulation so that he could come back. And again, he wanted to come back and take care of his babies, as he would say. He just wasn't about to sit home or do something else when he knew he could help out these little kids. So he was just driven to teach what he knew to others and to apply it. So he didn't work full time. He would be there 3 or 4 days a week, but he was still traveling, teaching, promoting. It was just his passion, and he wasn't about to stop.
Yeah,
kept going.
I met him by 1999, and it was for sure that he didn't want to stop.
No.
That passion, that spirit, he passed through us, because all of us have that kind of I don't want to go home and just do nothing. It's for us, it's something relaxing to be there. We like it. We try to do it better and better and better. And so it's interesting that we also have that passion that he gave us.
You know, he had a stroke 5 days before he died in October of 2009,
And he was at
and
work.
he had that stroke in his office at the hospital.
Yeah, yeah, he was still.
So he was on the job to
He
the
was
very
still
end.
hands-on.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is a. Can you stop your sharing your
Yeah, sure.
screen, please? There is another question that it's a little bit technical. Two questions in one, really. If you have any idea on how he realized that he was able to do the correction of the clubfoot, this functional anatomy, how did he got the answer that he was able to do the correction just thinking on the special subtalar joint?
Excuse me. Well, I think he had just, you know, as a scientist, he had done enough thinking about it. He'd done enough work with these stillborn babies and aborted fetuses, and really studied the anatomy, and understood that, you know, tendons and ligaments would respond to force and to pressure and to changes. I think he was just convinced of how elastic or how plastic the human foot was, and I think once he understood the sequence that he needed to realign things, I think he was just convinced, almost theoretically, that it would work. You know, because he had done his homework, he had understood, you know, really from the science that it was going to work. So, and then, you know, he took X-ray movies of his own feet, and went to great lengths to really understand what it is he was trying to do. So I think he was just determined to do it, and he probably tried some other things that didn't work. We didn't hear about those, but I doubt that stopped him. He was convinced.
Do you know who made this model based on those observations of the functional anatomy?
Yes, that's another interesting story. He wanted to teach the method, and he wanted to be able to demonstrate it. And he heard that there was a gentleman by the name of John Mitchell who made anatomical models for medical schools, a small little business in the town of Nichols, Iowa, which is a town of about 200 people, not far from here. So he went into, in the early 90s, he and his wife, Helena, went to visit John Mitchell. And John remembers he walked in and said, "I'm Dr. Ponseti. I treat kids with clubfoot at the university. I need you to make me a foot model." So he worked with John Mitchell for months with different versions of that model, until he got just what he wanted in terms of the elastic cords and the arrangement. So that's how that came to be, the plastic model. And later, of course, he went back to John Mitchell and said, "I need you to make me a brace." So the MD orthopedics brace was an offshoot of the collaboration between Dr. Ponseti and John Mitchell.
Okay. The other question is.
Let me jump in one other thing.
Okay.
When he walked in and said that, John Mitchell said, "Aren't you retired?" and Dr. Ponseti said, "What do you mean? I'm only 80." You know, that was his response to the insinuation that he wasn't sharp enough and didn't know what he wanted to do. It was indicative of his attitude at the time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. I was going to tell you that I'm pretty sure that Ponseti would be dancing today, because I think this is not a time to cry and see what's going on nowadays, because people today thinks that we have not done enough work in Ponseti. We still have relapses. We still don't have a unified concepts on the training of our people, and I feel we have done a lot. This is the joy and happiness of the kids and the parents and the doctors and the healthcare team celebrating the Ponseti 110th birthday. And these are today's pictures. And Latin America is really a Ponseti section important. This is very important to us. We have the power of convincing a lot more people that this is a very good thing to do. This is an exciting move in Ponseti world. This is important that we do more and more on awareness. I'm not sure if you have more things to add to this, because we would like to know what is the future now. What would you think that Ponseti would like us to do in terms of being better in the future for the kids?
Well, I think put simply is do more of the same. You know, continue the march. You know, in any innovation, when you're trying to do something new, I used to teach a course on innovation, and you have the early adopters, the people that glob onto a new idea and run with it. And then you have the people that sort of sit back and watch it for a while and say, yeah, it's a pretty good idea. I'll do it too. And then you have the people that sit back even further and eventually say, okay. And then at the tail end, you have what they call the laggards, the people who just aren't going to change their mind, or are very resistant to changing their mind and don't want to put any energy into something new. So I think you just got to keep pushing over the hill on that, and make progress in small increments, one physician at a time, one institution at a time, one patient at a time, and not go back. It's too important. You know, I mean, it's a kid's life. You know, it's a future, and I think we need to just not get hung up on little details or personalities or money, and just keep an eye on the vision. And Dr. Ponseti's vision is that there would be no kid in the world who would go through life with untreated clubfoot, and that's realistic. You can do that. You know, it means a lot of people just have to do a lot of little things day in and day out and keep going, and that'll happen. That'll happen.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom. We can do it. We can do it, and we have to do it. Yo creo que ya dando prácticamente término al webinar en unos momentos más, lo que le he tratado de explicar a Tom durante la tarde conversamos es que no es momento de llorar lo que no hemos hecho, no es momento de criticar, no es momento de estar en contraposición con todos. Nosotros tenemos que unirnos mucho más, hacer más entrenamiento y educación, mejorando las habilidades y destrezas que él nos dejara. Hay que hacer clínicas poncéticas verdaderas, basadas en el principio del método del tratamiento, y siempre atraer mucho más a todas las familias y a las redes sociales lo más que podamos. Trabajar en una tendencia mucho más global. Tenemos que encontrarnos con aquellos que tienen los mismos intereses e integrarnos con ellos, no estar discutiendo que si yo pongo un yeso más, un yeso menos, tú lo recibes, los braces de alguna parte, yo de otra. Tenemos que encontrar la forma de unificarnos mucho más en favor de los niños con el método y legado que nos dejara el profesor Ponseti. hay que hacerlo costo efectivo de todas maneras. Y hay que demostrárselo a quienes nos tienen que dar las posibilidades de tener un buen sistema de salud en nuestros países, que sabemos que donde hay más pobreza, no sabemos por qué, pero hay más tendencia a que los niños tengan este tipo de discapacidades. Y también hay que hacerlo sustentable en el tiempo, por supuesto. Pero por sobre todo yo les pediría que ojalá sean felices haciendo esto, que compartamos el conocimiento y que no nos olvidemos nunca de la sonrisa que los niños tienen después de haber sido tratados con el método de Ponseti y con las manos de todos ustedes. Tom, would you like to add something at the end of this? I hope
Well,
you understood my message here, and I said it in Spanish for my friends
sure.
in,
Well,
in
I
the
would just
room.
add, thank you very much for the privilege of sharing Dr. Ponsetti's story. And thank you all for what you do day in and day out, treating these kids. It's a real tribute to Dr. Ponseti and a tribute to all of you and your profession as healers and life changers. And I commend you for that, and I encourage you to keep going. Keep doing it. It's life changing, and you're to be commended for your efforts. And thanks for the opportunity to be part of it over the years.
Thank you very much, Tom. Sonia, I will leave you to close, please.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Dr. Cook. It was a pleasure for us to hear your conference. It was amazing to hear in this day the history, and especially from you. Thank you because of this passion you show us is the same passion we have. And I have seen the lives of many children, but of many of my colleagues changed due to Ponseti method. And this is the same passion we share from Iowa to Chile and through all Latin America.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias a todos por su asistencia. Creo que ha sido fantástico escuchar hoy al doctor Cook, oírlo de primera mano. Quiero darle paso al doctor Ricardo Mosquera, que nos quiere recordar algo sobre nuestro curso de SLAOTI. Vamos a tener un curso precongreso. Vamos a abrir la posibilidad de presentar casos clínicos y que los discutamos, perdón, en esta sesión. Ricardo, buenas noches.
Gracias, Sonia. First of all, thank you, Thomas, for your kind lecture. It was wonderful to know about Dr. Ponseti and how he comes to America.
Yeah.
Very, very nice. El anuncio que les quería decir es para el congreso que tenemos en octubre. Tenemos planificado hacer un curso precongreso sobre la patología del pie equinovaro. Creo que ya había coordinado con Sonia, creo que va a ser como para 50 participantes y ese se va a llevar a cabo en la tarde del día 23 de octubre en el Hotel Sortis, que es la sede del Congreso 11º de la Sociedad Latinoamericana de Ortopedia Infantil. Así que están todos cordialmente invitados y Sonia y yo les daremos notificación sobre los cupos y eso para que puedan ir reservando su espacio, ¿no? El congreso va a ser desde el 24 al 26 y tenemos diferentes módulos. Ya pronto, creo que finalizando este mes, debemos tener el programa preliminar y la confirmación de los expositores. Y si alguien quisiera tener espacio para alguna conferencia, me pueden hablar al privado o comunicarse conmigo a través de la WhatsApp, ¿no? Así que te agradezco, Sonia, por el espacio para poder dar las notificaciones y ojalá nos podamos ver en octubre acá en Panamá, en la ciudad de Panamá.
Yo ya con los tiquetes listos, emocionadísima de ir a conocer Panamá, que no conozco. Y bueno, de encontrarme con todos los amigos. Vi que el doctor Morcuende logró conectarse un momento. Sé que estaba en un momento de viaje justo, pero nos encantaría que cerrara esta reunión, doctor Morcuende. Gracias por acompañarnos.
Hola, lo siento que no haya podido estar más activo, que estábamos conduciendo a Chicago, que vamos a salir mañana de viaje. Muchísimas gracias. Es realmente siempre un placer el escuchar a Tom y todo el trabajo que ha hecho para conocer mejor la vida del doctor Ponseti y enseñarnos a nosotros. Y también decir que hoy es un día muy emocionante porque representan los 110 años del doctor Ponseti y estando todos aquí con el ánimo que tenemos y las ganas de trabajar y la ayuda que estamos dando a los niños y a las familias es algo muy, muy emocionante. Así que solo deciros que sigamos todos juntos, que trabajemos juntos para, para dar mejor vida a los niños. Gracias.
Gracias, doctor Morcuende. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Ha sido un tiempo fantástico. Esperamos vernos pronto y tendremos en un par de meses nuestro siguiente webinar que les anunciaremos con suficiente tiempo. Queda grabado este webinar en el link de YouTube para que lo puedan compartir y para que quienes no se pudieron conectar por diferente razón lo puedan hacer ahora. Un abrazo para todos y feliz noche. Gracias.
Besitos.